I guess the devil is in the details. Welcome to part 3 of this Walking Away series. I really do appreciate you being here. My mother grew up on a cotton plantation in Arkansas. She had a mammy that raised her. I last visited my mom's childhood home sometime in the 1960s, and there were still old and ramshackle slave quarters sitting behind the house. The mansion was amazing, and it seemed huge, and it probably wasn't as big as I remember it being, but it was an ancient dwelling even then. And we kids were encouraged to not explore the old slave quarters as they were full of hornets' nests, or so we were told. And at some time in the not so distant past, this house was moved to serve as a historic monument. And to be honest, I wouldn't doubt that in the current fever to erase any reminder of our past in an effort to scrub our consciousness clean, it's probably been destroyed. My mother was a Southern Democrat to the bone, and I have no idea my father's beliefs as he died when I was 9 years old. This sounds harsh, but my mother was a racist, but she never would have believed that of herself. She would, however, have considered her parents to have been more racist than she ever was, and her parents undoubtedly would have believed their parents to have been more so. I dare say that all of us have at least some taint of racism, regardless of your skin color, even if you wouldn't believe that of yourself. Argue that all you want. It can be something as simple as a feeling that one should marry outside of their religion or their culture or their race. That was a short digression, and I apologize. The issue of racism is something I really do want to touch on at some point, but not right at this moment. It deserves much more time of its own and a very careful approach, as just discussing racism can be seen as being racist in this day and time. I assumed I was a Democrat because my mother is a Democrat. And if you saw part 2 of this series, you'll remember that I really had no insight into politics for at least the first 32 years of my life. And I was rather Pollyanna about our government and their desires to make our lives safe, secure, and prosperous. Then along came Clinton, and then I figured he was just fine. I had no real distinct feeling about him or about his wife Hillary. Now, most people remember his first inaugural poet, a woman named Maya Angelou. Some people may or may not remember his second inaugural poet, my first cousin, Miller Williams. They may also not know that one of the gala ball performers for the second inauguration was Miller's daughter, a Grammy Award winner by the name of Lucinda Williams. We as a family were proud. However, mixed into all of that was some things called whitewater, accusations of rape and sexual harassment, people who were committing suicide, and a nice girl named Monica. This was about the time I actually started to sit up and to take notice. And during this time, secondary to my work schedule, I was able to pick up my kids from school every day. The only thing of remote interest at that time on the radio was Rush Limbaugh. He was only a remote interest because I still enjoyed making fun of him, and I didn't like him. I didn't think he had half of his brain tied behind his back just to make it fair. And I certainly didn't think he'd be right 99.9% of the time. And I remember one Christmas, my co-liberal wife and I even bought a copy of the book called Rush Limbaugh's A Big Fat Idiot to give to my conservative father-in-law. For what it's worth, that book was written by a man named Al Franken. Do you remember him? But a funny thing happened. Slowly but inexorably, I actually started to think for myself. I had kids. I had actual skin in the game. I was responsible for more than just myself. I now not only had my future to look out for, but a much more distant future for my kids and their kids. So politics suddenly became important, and what our leaders were doing affected everything that we were doing or wanted to do. Rush suddenly started to make more sense. And more sense until he finally did start to sound a little bit like a genius. My evolution and education was still far from finished. It still is, to be honest. But I was starting to see the light. My vision was still fuzzy, and I still tended to believe whatever I was told, but now much of my information was coming from sources more to the right of what it had been. I was still a glass half full sort of fellow that now believed our salvation lay on the right side of the political spectrum rather than on the left. And the Kool-Aid was tastier, but honestly still almost as poisonous. I was still what's called a low information voter. You tell me what I needed to believe, and I'd go out and repeat it. I'd go out and I'd vote the straight party ticket, and I would proudly wear the I voted sticker. It's equally as ignorant to blindly believe one side as it is to blindly believe the other. You have to inform yourself. You have to be willing to watch Fox News and then switch to CNN or or whatever they call themselves, MSNBC. Go on YouTube and watch dissenting beliefs. You have to grow a spine and a belief system. You have to be willing to expose yourself to those who don't think like you do, because it's on you to understand how others think in order to understand what's happening in this world. Then at some point you have to be willing to admit that each side has ideas that should be championed, and each side has ideas that should be condemned. Once you understand enough of the political spectrum and what each party represents, you can place yourself somewhere on the spectrum, ranging from the far left to the far right, or somewhere in between. Are you a democratic socialist, a liberal, a Democrat, an independent, a libertarian, a conservative, a Republican, a far-right fanatic? You're somewhere in there, but did you place yourself there, or did you get placed there out of ignorance? You need to be able to personally make up your mind as to where you are. Find out what each segment of the spectrum believes, what they advocate, and go from there. I don't care what you vote, as long as you vote based on principle and on knowledge and not out of ignorance. Although I was now right-leaning, I was actually rather charmed by the idea of our first African-American president. Surely people were understanding that race relations were much improved to the point where we could elect a black president. Hope and change. I mean, that sounded good. That sounded great. Fundamental transformation of America. That didn't sound quite right. For all the praise or condemnation that President Trump gets for doing exactly what he said he was going to do, President Obama did the same thing. I'm not going to go into a rant here because I would really love to do just that. I would love to expand on just how I think Mr. Obama brought us to the brink of ruin and how close to terminal velocity we were with Hillary Clinton. Needless to say, I finally found my focus during the Obama years. America was weakened by a president who apologized for everything in our history that might have offended anyone. Race relations became decisively worse. Our military was weakened. Our law enforcement was defined as racist and immoral, and our health system was very nearly ruined. For Brandon Strauch, who I mentioned before, the Walkaway Movement founder, it was a video that made him understand that he had been co-opted by a party that simply wanted him to feel defeated and despised. Other people, thousands of them, have made videos as to their reasons for walking away. For me, it was a slow progression of listening to what other people had to say, observing what the effects of policy were, and thinking for myself. But what was the final concrete thing that made sure I would never, ever believe in the liberals or the Democrat Party again? It was Donald J. Trump. Trust me on this. I did not want him in the race. My first choice was either Dr. Ben Carson or Carly Fiorina. At some point, I transitioned to Ted Cruz, and I even proudly carried my Cruz card. The Donald was anything but presidential. He was anything but genteel, anything but refined. He was anything but polite. He was anything but a fair fighter. He was nothing like any other candidate in history. He said what he thought, and he said what he's going to do. And if people didn't like it, he said it again. He called it like he saw it. While it seemed he was anything like what had come before, he was everything we needed at that moment and at this point in history. He started using phrases like fake news, and I thought, what the hell is he talking about? But he shed light on it, and it quickly became evident what fake news was, and still is. He said we needed to drain the swamp. What swamp? Oh, that swamp. He warned us of the deep state. While liberals and even some Republicans were painting the USA as abhorrent, with a past of shame and guilt, Trump was shouting, "Make America great again." He was saying that we were still the greatest nation on earth, and we could even be more so if we would just stop corrupting ourselves from within. Donald Trump does what he says he's going to do, much to the dismay of the people who would like to see him toppled. Rather than sit back, as previous Republican administrations have done in the past, and let the liberals lie about them, Trump calls them liars, and he screams loudly about witch hunts. And hunt him avidly they do, with plans that were actually hatched before he was ever elected, just in case he was somehow, beyond all belief, elected. The House of Representatives has tottered through 3 years of an attempted coup rather than do what they were elected to do. We allowed socialists to be elected. We made rock stars out of people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a bar hop that could not pass the United States citizenship test on her best day. Then Alex from the Hood ganged up with other members who are hell-bent on destroying everything this country stands for. And other members of Congress are terrified of bucking them because the eye of Sauron might be turned on them instead. The idea and presence of a deep state has become more and more defined thanks to their very own actions. When the Mueller report withered on the vine, they went to Plan 2, which was to claim that President Trump had attempted a quid pro quo with the government of the Ukraine. And as of this date, shortly after the second week of impeachment hearings, with transcripts made public of phone calls and many witnesses coming up, there has been absolutely no evidence of this. However, in order to try to impugn this president, some of the deep staters have actually had to come out of their wormholes. And from their testimony to date, it would seem they didn't have any actual evidence, but they were mostly outraged that the president of the United States would have the temerity to shape his own foreign policy over a policy which they have been brewing for years. Their feelings were hurt that he would recall a diplomat that was not upholding his agenda, so they want his blood. They want him impeached or rendered unelectable. And I think I have bad news for them. I know what my 2020 plans are. I'd like to think President Trump is undefeatable and that liberals have poisoned their own wells, but nothing is ever for sure. If we're too comfortable, we will be gravely disappointed. Each one of you needs to become informed, and then you need to become the teachers. And sure, it can cost you friends. It may cost you a lot of friends, but better friends are out there. We need at least 12 more years of conservative control with true conservatives and not these never-Trumpers and rhinos. We need to vote out the idiots. We need to think about term limits, and we need to put people in that have the beliefs that we can be the country that I innocently believed us to be when I was a child. Just 4 more years isn't going to do it, and Lord forbid we lose this next election, because the damage that will ensue is most likely going to be insurmountable. We will become a socialist country. We will become the next Venezuela. There is an old quote that I recently heard again that's attributed to Abraham Lincoln, but he never said it in exactly these words, but it goes like this: America will never be destroyed from the outside. If we lose our freedoms, it will be because we have destroyed ourselves from within. So what he more precisely said was, at what point then is the approach of danger to be expected? I answer, if it ever reach us, it must spring up amongst us. It cannot come from abroad. If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. As a nation of freemen, we must live through all time or die by suicide. Does that sound familiar? Does that seem like maybe what's going on now? If you listened to this until the end, then God bless you. This was a 3-part series, and I could have made it much, much longer, but rather than do that, I'll save it and make future videos. I'm linking to Brandon Strock's page below, and please feel free to visit. I encourage you to. And if you don't know him, he was one of those liberals that made ranting videos, crying his eyes out after Trump was elected. As an openly gay hairstylist in New York, he knew that his personal future was ruined until he decided to open his eyes, until he decided to inform himself. If you liked this video, then please hit the like button. If you're not subbed, please do so. And most of all, if you think there was anything in this video of any importance, please share it. Thank you for spending your valuable time with me to watch this, and have a great day.